Karen Kerrigan. I'm COO of Moneybox. We are a personal finance app that helps people save and invest for their future. We offer a suite of different products to help people with their goals, from savings accounts to investment ISAs, general investment accounts, lifetime ISAs for people saving for their first home, mortgages and pensions. We raised our Series C last year and are on the next stage of our growth. This was a hard one, actually. I'm not a particularly secretive person. I suppose, the thing that I've probably utilised a bit in the interesting fact thing that you do over the remote sort of icebreaker stuff is that I've got a partially metal jaw owing from an operation I had when I was younger. So probably more of an interesting fact than a secret, but there you go. So how did I become a COO? I trained as a lawyer. I worked as a lawyer. I was a very frustrated lawyer, I think, from law school. And about 10 years ago, I decided that I was going to go off and start my own business. That all seemed a bit scary. So the next, or the next least scary thing, I suppose, was to join a startup. So in 2013, I joined Seedrs, which at that point was just a handful of people in a room, and initially joined in a legal and finance capacity. Over the course of the next few years, I ended up just acquiring functions, responsibilities, became their COO, and ended up staying there for over 7 years. A typical day, functionally I cover legal, compliance and risk, people and customer ops. So the typical day, to the extent that there is one at this type of business, is really working with the team heads on areas that need more attention or support. And then at other times I will focus on more company-wide initiatives, such as upgrading our governance or org design, or looking at how to deliver on our scalability metrics. But I've only been at Moneybox for about 6 months, so really the typical day is what the business needs on that particular day. Gosh, it varies, doesn't it? But COOs come in such different shapes and sizes, and I suppose the comparator I have is being a general counsel, where regardless of the stage of business that you're at, generally the challenges that you're having are the same, just at a different level of scale. So compared to that, I'd say that the COO really does vary and needs to be complementary to your founders, your CEO, other senior members of the team. And which is why it's so important to make sure that the business fit is right. So I think there's definitely a functional skill set requirement that is particular to the business. But I suppose on a more general level, a skill that I found really important is being able to listen very carefully to your stakeholders and work out the problems that they're facing. Sometimes they won't even know the problems that they're facing, or there'll be commonalities throughout the stakeholders. And then proposing and, most importantly, executing on a plan to deal with that. I think it's often said, and probably has been said before on these podcasts, but the COO role is generally thought of as the one that, the glue that binds the company together. And I take the approach that you can't be everywhere. So the success of delivering on being that glue is being able to prioritize what most needs the adhesive at any one point in time. Biggest challenges, I suppose, are being prepared to jump in to a particular role in the business when someone else isn't there. And that could be for any reason. It could be that they are on a plane, have had to deliver sort of bad news before, when at a previous business, when a COO was on a plane and literally unavailable, where someone is sick, when someone just has a different set of skills to you. So for example, you might have a brilliantly technical CTO who may be struggling a little bit with how they manage performance with one of their best team members who's having a bit of a problem. And I think that probably that has been a challenge, but one that I've enjoyed, is that, and I talked about sort of the filling the gaps, but literally jumping into different roles, and sometimes roles that you have no technical expertise in. And from when the very first day that I started at Seedrs is saying yes to things, and now obviously that comes countered with you've got to manage the level of things you can be involved in at any one time. But my motto really has been to sort of think broadly but learn deeply. I do think context is important, both within the business. I think even as an ex-lawyer, I was better at legal the more I knew about finance, the more I knew about marketing and so on. So I think context is very important, both within the business but also outside of it. What are your competitors doing? What are other players in the market doing? That said, I think if you want to be able to lead functional teams with credibility and trust, you also need to be prepared to learn about the area and become an expert in it, even if it's just temporarily before you move on to the next thing. I think probably something that I wish I knew early on, which again I think is probably more difficult for someone that comes from a vocational trade, let's say as a lawyer, where there is a very clear career path and stepping stones, is that being, I think, a COO in particular, but probably a C-level function at any kind of startup or scale up, is being very comfortable with working in ambiguity. It was something that my old CEO definitely said to me and landed in terms of how I think about my progression and how I think about being better at the job that I'm doing, and being comfortable with ambiguity was a massive thing that I basically struggled with, I think from a personality point, but also that vocational learning, sort of legal training sort of thing. But I think it is absolutely right. You don't know what's going to come around the corner as a COO of a venture-backed startup or scale up, both from your competitive market, your internal factors, your investors, your runway, and so on. So I think in order to survive in these sorts of worlds, that's a key one for me.